Welcome to Deeply Disturbing Things.
The podcast.
I'm Macy,
I'm Naomi.
and we are two anxious counselors who like to talk about deeply disturbing things.
And Sarah, our occasional, may pop in. We're not sure where she is, but she
She
has the
might.
link, so she can join at any time.
Right, right. I just realized as I was checking in that I'm still working on getting my voice back. Like there's still struggles on some high notes.
Macy,
I was sick for a while. Like it took a long time. I completely lost my voice for probably two-ish
were you
days.
eating enough elderberries?
Oh, I started the elderberry regiment. That was kind of when, as things had gotten worse, and then I got better. So I then went and bought like the chewable gummies, and
Mhm.
those are, first of all, delicious.
Delicious, right?
Delicious. And Flintstone gummies are no better than the Flintstone vitamins, by the way, than they were back then. I was like,
Oh,
oh, maybe they're better, but they're like hard and not a good gummy texture or flavor. I was disappointed. That's all.
I didn't ever like the texture. It's almost kind of like dog food.
Yes, yes. Well, that's completely unrelated to the topic
Completely
today.
unrelated. All right.
Completely unrelated. So today I'm going to talk about, and this I started as we do down a little rabbit trail. Um, I was kind of exploring a bit about something in the realm, just in case I use it later, I'm not going to say it, in the realm of like the medical um field, and then I tripped upon a info thing, I don't know, a stat perhaps, um, that took me down this trail. And I'm going to talk about solitary confinement.
Oh
And
my gosh, I was going to do a topic on this. I'm so glad you're doing this. It's
okay,
fascinating.
good. So, right, I'm going to talk about the neurobiology that's involved around being confined.
I'm going to
So
take
I
it
don't
off
know.
my list.
Good. I mean, if I'm going the angle that you were going to go, because there could be other angles. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how the U.S. government handles that, how they view it, and how states handle it. So, uh, I think this is very interesting, first of all, because we just, finished COVID and isolation and people being home. And I found multiple articles talking about the difference between loneliness, which is the kind of the imposition of social isolation, and aloneness, which is the choice of being alone.
Mm.
And the brain reacts very differently in those situations. Loneliness or that social isolation was a big part of the whole epidemic and lasted a few years, and it did impact people's brains, uh, leading to things like depression, mood disorders increased, and even increase in current mental health symptoms like suicidality, that may go along with folks who already have that.
And how
Um,
about just general politeness? I think people forgot how to be humans with each other.
right, right. How to etiquettes, and not feeling like a burden, but like just
So the difference is that
being.
choice. Like I'm choosing this versus I'm put in this situation.
Well, and but alone, so loneliness was kind of put upon people. Aloneness is a choice. So some people were like, I love this. I love being alone. And they embraced that and they were fine, perhaps, or that happens in other settings. Um, both of those, though, had what studies showed was that any ill effects could be reversed if appropriate social interactions were reestablished and or social activities. So those are actually different
Hmm.
than if someone does not have an option.
So it's like just add water, just add humans, and you'll return to your former shape.
Right. So with solitary confinement, there is no option. There is no control. There is no hope. There is no this will get better. And that has been shown to have a completely different impact on the brain than the
You're gonna
other
give
two
us
that I
some
mentioned.
stats.
I got
I'd lo-
stats.
I'd
I got
love to
stats.
know, yeah, like how often this is still happening and all that.
Well, and first though, I'm going to share about Robert King. He was an ex-inmate who was in solitary confinement for 29 years. He talked about his experience. He, uh, he he shared with a room full of neuroscientists to help be part of this study that was done in 2018. He was confined in a 6 by 9 foot cell for almost those 30 years with limited contact and limited exercise.
Why?
For
Like, what was the reason that he
that's
had to
part
be
that
alone?
this doesn't really go into because
Okay.
like his crimes or anything like that. But that was his punishment was to be in solitary confinement. So, but which he was later released for.
I mean, it seems like we're getting into the area of like cruel and torture and violating
You'll be very
human
interested to
rights.
hear what that actually is defined as. So,
Yeah, I would. I'm
what
interested.
I'm sure you would, and we will, and we will. So, what these neuroscientists have found is that, I mean, first of all, everyone's like, "Gosh, this must not be good for the brain." I mean,
Wow, they
probably
seem really smart. I mean, right
right.
off
They're
the
the
bat with that.
smartest neuroscientists. They're the
That's a
smartest.
winning hypothesis right there.
Correct. So he said, I'm turning your volume up because I enjoy hearing you. Okay, there we go. Um,
That made me really happy.
he said that he knew and could tell his brain was changing over time. And I was like, just that statement made me like, that's horrifying. Like just that and I think many people who experience significant mental health changes maybe like start experiencing symptoms of psychosis, for example. Like you start feeling that like, okay, this is different. Why
Mhm.
did that happen? This is scary. What do I do?
Right. I don't feel like myself.
Right, right. Um, I didn't want to act like that, or I didn't remember acting like that. So he started to notice, so this finally, when he was released, he had trouble recognizing faces. He
Wow.
like actually recognizing people's faces. And we've talked about that before in some other about facial recognition type stuff about how like happy and sad and you've talked about like the mirror neurons and all those things.
And staring in the mirror. Remember the stranger,
Right,
the
right,
mirror
right.
stranger? How you don't even
Right.
recognize yourself after staring in the mirror for a little while?
Right. So, whew, sorry, my scotch is strong.
Maybe you're not as classy as
Whew,
I,
no, no, no.
I thought. Maybe I threw that compliment onto you a little
I'm
premature.
not classy. I'm just trying a new thing. This is um so right. So that part of the brain is now completely out of whack. He actually had to go through like a retraining process in order to retrain his eyes. So like just the physical process of his eyes to recognize what facial features look like and to get his brain to recognize and categorize that quickly enough to process it.
Hmm.
And imagine how hard that is. Like we've talked about uh people being institutionalized and recidivism rates where people go back into prison settings. And if something like that, I mean, it's literally rewiring how your brain processes information and takes it in.
Yeah. I mean, with neuroplasticity, I mean, any experience is gonna change our brain.
So, also he said his entire sense of direction was messed up. So he couldn't like just like a simple route to get home. His brain couldn't process like, okay, left and then right and then down a few blocks. Like his brain couldn't follow those kind of directionals anymore. Again, when you're in a setting where you have no context
Right. It's like being inside a casino.
or Walmart,
Yes.
right? It just and like
How do I get out of here?
bright lights, small room, limited engagement with other people, and like creative ways of punishing people, maybe getting like your toothbrush one day but no toothpaste, or like maybe you get soap but nothing to put it on. Like the guards can be very creative in how they make that non-pleasurable, which is the intent.
Hmm.
So, especially if you act like it doesn't bother you. Okay, so his brain had actually, what the neuroscientists had found, had actually erased all of those capabilities. They were no longer necessary for survival when he was in the cell. So, he, which was no bigger than the back of a pickup truck, so his brain started to just kind of trim off any sort of neurons that related to direction, memory recall, and facial recognition.
So what grew? I mean, what was like the essential functions for that
Mm.
environment?
My brain instantly just thought of like mole people. Like when you,
Oh yeah, maybe he developed some echolocation skills.
I mean, that was not in my research, but that's where my brain went. I watched Avatar and they have like the mole things and like that. Anyways, okay. So, okay. Sorry, my screen went dark. Okay, the areas that it did increase were, what do you think?
I mean, I'm thinking small space. You wouldn't maybe detecting like sounds from far away, like who's coming and what's going on like outside your space. I don't know.
Right. So like,
Couldn't see
but
it, but that might be very important to know, like, oh, they're bringing my food now or something.
right. So that's actually the amygdala increases in activity, which is that fear and anxiety because it has you like hone in on and be attentive to minor changes that are happening immediately around you. And that sustained stress of extreme isolation leads to a loss of activity in the hippocampus, and which is related to learning, memory, spatial awareness, and it decreases the formation of new neurons in the brain, and eventual failure completely in that functioning of the hippocampus. So it will actually just stop. And with that increase in fear and anxiety, now you think about that person then just gets released and they get to leave.
How about language skills? Were they impacted since you're not really talking to other people?
I mean, I'm sure that probably has to do with some of the maybe the learning and memory parts. Um, I'm sure there's even just a cultural adjustment too, especially like for him, he was away for so long, knowing how to engage, social cues, all of that would be really, really hard.
Yeah.
So there were studies on mice that showed that just 1 month of isolation caused a decrease of 20% in total volume of neurons in the brain. But researchers saw that the remaining neurons were branching out more than those mice that were not isolated. When the isolation went on longer, up to 3 months, researchers saw that the extra branching of the neurons was no longer happening. And that in exchange, spines, which are structures that neurons develop to place the machinery to communicate to each other, were greatly diminished. So, what does that mean? The branching that took place in the first month of isolation represents some sort of compensation that the brain is trying to overcome the deficit. It's trying to find a way to cope um, and prevent a detrimental effect. So, it's trying really hard. But when it went on for too long, then that stops, and it triggers a loss of neural communication in the form of those spine communication eliminations. So now the neurons stop communicating with each other. They have stopped trying to navigate a way out, navigate a way to survive.
Did you at least get books?
I have heard that that's a thing. Yeah.
At least that's some kind of stimulation.
Right, but that's not even so this is saying isolation itself in confinement where there is no choice does this regardless of having books or stimulation. So it within itself is causing this damage. And so if it's impacting your learning and memory, are you going to be able to read and have that actually be impactful over a long period of time?
I think I would start talking to myself,
I mean, then you're going to have a
having
different
conversations with myself.
mindset. So I thought that was really fascinating. And I remember there was a study way back, another mice study one, where they put the mice in a bucket of water. Really horrible study, but they put mice in a bucket of water, and so one group, they would take them out of the water on occasion and put them back in, and they swim and they swim and they swim in circles, and they're exhausted. But they're the ones who got out on occasion and then went back in, had lower stress levels
Hmm.
than obviously the ones who were put in and there was no intermittent. It was just like at the very end they were pulled out. It was just like this, once you have no hope that you will be removed, it just changes your brain's ability to process how to cope with it.
Yeah, that learned helplessness.
Yeah, and I think it's more neurological than people give it credit for. I think it's very much chalked up to choice. Like, oh, you're choosing not to make good choices, or you're choosing to react badly.
That's blaming people for their trauma responses or
Right.
blaming mice. Poor mice.
I know. It's like poor guy, little mice. But yeah, and I mean, you again, like if this were visibly seen physical disabilities, it would not be even questioned. It would just be, oh yeah, that has a horrible impact. How can we help? I saw Sarah message. I don't know if you saw.
No,
So it has that sensory
yeah,
deprivation part. Go ahead.
it's okay. She's probably
So
not joining us, it sounds like.
probably the small cells are isolated. They're windowless. Um, Typically, they're entitled to 1 hour of exercise. Sometimes that doesn't happen if there's a busy schedule, though, at the prison. The sensory deprivation, this is all per King's report from earlier. The sensory deprivation contributes to important health and impairments such as alterations in circadian rhythm, so sleep cycles, biological clocks that regulate from sunlight, and that just all out of whack. Um, Solitary confinement, according to neurological research, is a punishment. It is not so much a punishment, but closer to a form of torture. It has serious consequences for neurological health, and the research really is still fairly new into this. I mean, this was 2018. So there's a lot of attention, or it calls for a lot of attention into how science is integrated into law or how it isn't, and how emotional injuries are recognized
Mhm.
or not recognized. Because right now they're really not.
So 29 years seems really extreme. Is that typical?
I mean, probably not typical, probably not the standard, but because sometimes it'll be to protect someone from someone else's threat. Sometimes it's for bad behavior, and it's like a period of time. But some people are in that, that for whatever reason, that is their whole time will be in there. So I think it depends probably on the prison and whether it's maximum security or um, and what type of offending unit. So according to the United States government, solitary confinement is not cruel and unusual as a
What?
punishment.
Our government said that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is, I mean, our government does it. So it says it is cruel and unusual if one or more of these accompanying material conditions result in a necessary infliction of pain upon an individual. So here we go. This requirement is met when such conditions involve a, quote, deprivation of basic identifiable human needs to the extent that they inflict harm, or create a quote substantial risk of serious harm, and they are enacted with deliberate indifference by prison personnel. So there you go.
I
That's your
think we
definition.
need some new research because it was my understanding that being around other people was essential.
Right. Well, and with and how does science get put into law? It doesn't. It
What are we
isn't
basing it off of? Feelings?
how we feel about it. Yeah. So, with limited exceptions, the Supreme Court and lower federal courts have really had a very narrow application of those two standards. In particular, courts have been discounted, they have discounted the effects of general mental health pain caused by extreme isolation. It is dismissed as not being related as substantial risk or serious harm. So, how do you feel about that as a mental health counselor?
Well, I mean, I think just like them, I don't want to base it just on feelings because that usually doesn't turn out well. But if the whole point of prison is rehabilitation and we want people to integrate,
Is that the point?
damaging, I mean, I don't know. What is the point? What is the point of prison? I guess we need to start with there. But if people are coming out so damaged that they can't function in society, I mean, that doesn't help them, that doesn't help society. And they're probably going to just end up back in prison, in the prison system, which costs a lot of money and is
And
not
is
good for.
horribly racially unjust and is like over there's so much inherent racism that makes the prison system target minority individuals and lower socioeconomic status. Like there's so much that like it is creating. I mean, the only thing I can honestly think of is like generational trauma that's gonna like come
More
from
generational
over
trauma.
and
Yeah.
over. Yeah, additional.
Additional disparities.
Yeah, maybe institutionalized generational trauma. Um, so from that research, uh, the neuroscientist community says that solitary confinement is in and of itself cruel and unusual punishment, even under those standards.
Okay.
They think that they need to have a profound rethinking of solitary confinement and how it's being discussed. So the reality of solitary confinement in the US is pretty notorious. It has been commonly used. Legal and psychological literature accounts have there's so many stories of people who are forced into extreme isolation, 22, 23 hours for indefinite time frames, no meaningful social contacts, often in not good conditions. And presumably, um, it's to meet a disciplinary, security, or safety related need. So it's considered legitimate.
So they do it to punish for bad behavior or to protect that person or protect other people. That's
Mhm.
like kind of the reasoning behind it.
Correct. Yeah. So that being said, there is no uniform regulation or consistent administration of solitary confinement across states, which is just baffling. Like, okay, so that previous description, okay, how can you just allow that to be at the discretion of the prison, which is typically how it falls? It'll end up going to the specific prison administrations, like how they choose to administer it.
Right. Instead of like the court system or something like
I mean,
that.
not like I'm a fan of the court system in making decisions for mental health either, or confidentiality, but I think, or even just having some sort of like, here's procedures that we expect, a minimum, like, I don't know if Department of Health will come in and do like an audit on safety for a building. Like, why wouldn't you do an audit of safety for how you're treating people who have no
I
right?
think it's, out of sight, out of mind that
Which is like
there's a lot
institutional.
of bad shit that goes on in prisons and nobody keeps an eye on it, regulates it.
Right. Well, and institutionalization for mental health was, you know, everybody did it and nobody thought it was a big deal to just isolate people off. And I did that one topic where there's literally an island that they would boat people off to so they weren't in the public's eye.
We have an
And
island here in Washington. I mean, not for that, but for sex offenders.
right, right. And
We do a
that's
topic on that sometime.
that would be
I think
interesting.
it's called Rikers
Write it
Island.
down. Rikers, yeah. And that has been so with mental health, it's been deemed not okay anymore, but it's closer, right? Like I could have a family member who has a mental health condition, and there's probably more people who are connected. So it became more visual. I don't know. And it's not a thing anymore. Not like that was handled well either, but
I think we just keep doing things like we've been doing them unless
over
somebody
and over
creates a
again.
fuss or there's a big
And pick,
problem.
well, and it's like
That's
what defines a problem even? It could because there's been so many things that come up as a problem that
Well, it
don't get
has to.
addressed.
I think people are lazy and don't want to change things, or they're set in their ways, or they are in a position of power and don't want to lose it. I think there's so many factors that keep us just doing the same kind of thing. Like we don't
That,
like change as
that
people.
keep the very white upper class middle-aged men from making good decisions
Yeah,
in our
I think
country.
there's a lot in play with that, and so
Yeah,
change. It takes people like just being really loud and kind of blowing up the system.
right. Make it uncomfortable for those white middle-aged or older, financially well-off people.
The cishet white males making all the
Yes,
decisions for this country.
correct. So, okay. Oh, I went on. We tangented. All right. So, no regulations. The administration is very arbitrary. Like how it gets used is often just kind of off the cuff, for what they decide they want to do. This has led to a lot of abuses of it and misuses of it. And there have been some reforms in certain jurisdictions with recommendations by the Department of Justice and national associations, which there is a website that I kind of went through and a lot of really interesting articles about advocacy in that way. Uh, but basically talking about reducing, like having a maximum amount of time that can be spent in extreme isolation, or by banning the use of solitary confinement for more vulnerable prison populations, including people with mental health conditions or juveniles. So like at least being considerate of how long, the conditions that they're in,
Yeah,
and who is going in there.
I think some
Um,
consistency would be
right.
sort of a step in the right direction because that'll take some of the feels out of it, right? Because I can imagine someone sent there because they, broke the rules and maybe they talk back or like go for a swing on the guard and they're like, oh, now you're in for 2 more days.
Right. It can be, yeah, right, right. But it says progress is really limited and very inconsistent.
It's
So
like
they
adult timeout.
yeah, like go stand in the corner. Like you wouldn't put your kid in there for 5 months.
Well, some parents might.
Maybe, maybe. So the American State Correctional Association in 2018 indicated that the number of people forced into isolation has decreased in 24 of the states. However, in 11 other states, it has increased. So it just
Can you name a
depends on.
couple of the states that it's gone down or gone up?
It doesn't have, I could bounce over to that. That did come from a specific article. Um, I'll follow up on that.
Okay.
So I mean, why is that even a thing? Why is deprivation the thing that we're like, how do we punish someone? Deprivation. How is that a thing?
Why is punishment even a thing?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's much research that shows that that works to create behavior change.
Hmm.
So I think we have to, again, go back to like the foundational reason, like, why do we even have prisons? Like, what is the point of it?
So the constitutional standard, under the Eighth Amendment has a ban on cruel and unusual punishments. So this is the one thing that has kind of been one pillar to stand on for this. Um, the Supreme Court established in the case of Estelle that conditions of confinement, including solitary confinement, amount to cruel and unusual punishment, provided that they result in an unnecessary and wanton, interesting word,
Wonton?
infliction of pain.
Like wonton soup?
I guess it is spelled that way.
Hmm.
So this deprivation of basic identifiable human need to the extent they inflict harm or substantial risk of harm with a deliberate indifference. So this can be very subjective. Uh, and that's where they're kind of like some states have increased, others have gone down. It probably depends who is within those court systems ruling on these cases as well for what the prison is going to, because if they keep getting ruled against and having these cases against them, they're going to do less of it. But if it
Right.
goes in the favor of the system, then they're not going to change it.
Right. And if you, I mean, we know this from working with kids, like if you're using punishment too much, people just stop caring.
Right. Well, and I talked about like when you say no, not to do something, people are more likely to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Like I
so
work with so many parents where they're just like they're just trying so hard to gain control over this kid's behavior. You know, they take everything out of the room, they take their door off, and it's like
right.
when people have nothing to lose, they don't care anymore. So that approach just doesn't work. They're already in prison.
Right. Like it already sucks.
Yeah, I think it's complicated for sure. I mean, there's no easy answer, especially if somebody, people that offend against children, I've heard that like they are targets for people trying to kill them in
Right.
prison. So what does that mean? More security, more money, that's probably not in the cards with our current system, so they put them by themselves.
Right. Well, and that's where, so with those Supreme Court like definitions, part of it is what is defined as cruel and unusual, and because that's part of how they figure out if it's okay or not. And the first approach of assessing that is to look at the severity of the crime that's committed. So it's cruel and unusual when its excessive length or severity is greatly disproportionate to the offenses charged.
That sounds
Such judge
very, very subjective.
Such judgments must be made with consideration to the evolving standard of decency that marks the progress of a maturing society.
What is that standard? Tell me.
The
What is it?
evolving, well, they literally say evolving standard of decency.
So we have a subjective moving target.
A
Awesome.
subjective moving target of a growing society that will change.
Okay.
And it's based on the severity of the offenses charged. So this is what's interesting too, is it's used all the time as punishment within the prison, not just as a like this is your confinement for your crime.
Right.
So therefore, would that technically be excessive for anybody who wasn't initially charged with it?
Right. Which takes it back to like the courts where there is some precedence, even though it's that still wildly varies too,
Right,
where your sentence could be all over the place compared to the crimes of other people that were similar.
right, right.
What are we doing? What are we doing here?
I don't know. I don't know.
That's like a real dumpster fire, if you ask me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this narrowness, let's just, I mean, yeah, just for the sake of it, keep going a bit. So
Yeah.
the now basic human need, that
Okay.
phrase. Supreme Court has generally stated that constitutional protections that relate to conditions of confinement following a criminal conviction derive from this acknowledgement. Prisoners retain the essence of human dignity inherent in all persons, and that through incarceration, quote, society takes from prisoners the means to provide their own needs. Therefore, a prison that derives prisoners of basic sustenance is incompatible with the concept of human dignity and has no place in civilized society. So
Hmm.
they understand basic need as an identifiable minimal life necessity, which includes food, water, shelter, exercise, medical care, and sanitation.
Not socialization. That's not in there.
So it has mostly to do with physical needs to stay alive.
So again, we're separating that mental health and physical health.
Mm-hmm. And there's so little, because in order to do research on populations, as you know, you have to get things approved through the IRB, the Institutional Review Board. You would have to, I did in my doctoral program, one of the students wanted to do research on recidivism rates and he had to change he spent almost a year trying to just get approvals from the prison to do this study and ended up falling through.
Because it would have been too
So
much of an expose. Is that why?
they just I mean they put it was mostly like the amount of hoops that were required. They made it where it just wasn't possible to meet their requirements. And that's how you filter out research you don't want. So you start to like see how
All right.
data can be skewed very
Ah,
easily for people who are actually in it. So we often hear it after the fact from those who get released. What about the people that aren't?
and we have no mice representatives on the IRB board.
These mice need
They
representation.
need representation.
Right.
Nothing about us without us, right, mice?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree.
Imagine the mice in the background squeaking their agreement. Whole
So
bunch
that
of mice back there.
basic mice needs, I mean, human needs, must result in substantial risk or serious harm. So it's measured by whether society considers the risk to be so grave that it violates contemporary standards of decency to expose anyone unwillingly to such a risk. So standards of decent welfare that anyone would be okay with. And none of this sounds like anyone would be okay with this.
I don't
So
think anyone's signing up for this.
right. So they're obviously leaning a hard direction on this, which is that food, water, like those objective things.
And I
Um,
think food also is very, you know,
right. Because they're saying that would be starvation. So the harm that would be caused, starvation, thirst, disease from poor hygiene. But again, it's all physical. They don't care about someone's mental health impacts, which I don't understand how that's not like I could be physically well and not mentally well
yeah,
and have far more impact on my life.
can't
Okay.
separate the mind and body. I think those are just really old views that are still at play and they're impacting laws and public policies.
Mhm.
WTF?
WTF. Such exceptions is grounded in the idea that mental illness renders people more vulnerable to the harmful effects of extreme isolation. So there was a case of Madrid versus Gomez, where the federal district court likened the placement of persons with mental illnesses in solitary confinement to, quote, putting someone who is asthmatic in a place with little air to breathe. Although the court recognized that prolonged isolation and scarce environment can cause psychological trauma, so they recognize that. Um, and they recognize that it could cause it with people who have no history of mental health conditions too. So they acknowledged that and they said, quote, for many inmates, it does not appear that the degree of mental injury suffered significantly exceeds the kind of generalized psychological pain that courts have found compatible with the Eighth Amendment standards. So they're basically saying that we are okay. We understand that and we are okay with it. That is what that means.
Who are these
We,
people?
society, decent society has decided that it is okay to torture people to this level of extent. Not people, inmates is
I feel
what
like I wasn't given a vote in this. Nobody asked me.
nobody has ever asked me either.
I had no survey monkey sent to me on this.
no, no. And so that subjective, deliberate indifference of prison guards is another vague thing, which means it requires that state official to know of and disregard excessive risks to an inmate's health or safety. Therefore, the official must both be aware of the facts and uh, be doing something that they basically would cause more infliction and punishment around that. So all you have to do is say, I didn't know that would happen, which they wouldn't because it's mental health. Like, of course, the guard wouldn't know the psychological impact of not providing being, I don't know, like it's,
I always thought you weren't allowed to fall back on ignorance as
I
a
know they
reason for
say
not
that when
doing
you
the right
get pulled
thing.
over, when you get pulled over, ignorance doesn't get you out of the ticket.
Right, exactly. Oh, I didn't know the speed limit was that.
But that's literally built in.
Yeah,
Like,
it's built in.
and that's what I think some of the issue, not some of the, like, in the cases of police violence, um, when people do get pulled over and like with some of the recent cases with black men specifically being killed, and it's like I had every right to do what I was doing because I don't know what just happened because I was protecting myself. And I didn't know. I didn't know
Yeah,
that I
I
was
can't.
suffocating him. I didn't know.
Yeah, that's not a viable excuse, I don't think, in any realm.
But it literally says that the proof of the official's awareness or disregard can rely completely on circumstantial evidence. Um, like they can just, it doesn't have to be factual that they didn't know. They can just be circumstantial. Like
Can you
I was,
imagine if we were able to use that in our day-to-day life? Well, I didn't know.
I didn't know.
I
I
didn't
didn't know.
know. Sorry. My bad.
Yeah, but like you're literally doing something that you know is harmful. Like that's it's like it has to be both, which is messed up. Like I can do something that I know harms people, but I can, just be ignorant or say that I didn't and
Right.
what?
What?
What? What?
What?
What?
What is happening?
What? Okay, so there's a lot of interest in this area to try to find something different. How do you protect interests of prisoners, inmates? How do you do that? Like you're not as an advocate, right?
Well, I heard a talk recently. I went to Colorado last month, and there was some people that had been incarcerated, transgender um, women of color that were incarcerated that spoke about their experience. And
Mhm.
somebody at one point said something, and it was just like, it was so simple and obvious, and like, it should be a no-brainer, but I just think we're so ingrained in like, well, we've always done it this way, so this is the way it is. This
Mhm.
person was like, we don't have to have prisons. Like, this is a choice we're making. And I was
Mhm.
like, wow, we don't have to have prisons. Like, I mean, of course, this is a complete system overhaul, but we don't have to have this system that is clearly flawed in so many ways.
Yeah.
Let's kick the table over, Macy.
Let's kick the table over. Because then you get statements like this from the courts that's frustrating. Like there was one where the plaintiff had endured mental suffering due to placement in a supermax confinement, observing that he had repeatedly banged his head against the wall of the cell. So the officer saw this. Um, it was acknowledged that it was a concerning situation. the court demonstrated its unwillingness to interfere with the management of this, which the management was, they didn't do anything. Because they said, quote, prison authorities must be given considerable latitude in the design of measures for controlling homicidal maniacs without
Maniacs.
exacerbating their manias beyond what is necessary for security. It is a delicate balance.
How, what was the year of that quote? It seems like there's a lot of dated
That
language.
was that was from Scarver versus Litcher court case, the Seventh Circuit Court. Um, it is really, I mean, again, there's still so much stigma around mental health in general, and just that sentiment,
Are we calling
like
people maniacs still?
that was in the legal court documents. Um, they it's basically like, well, they have the right to defend themselves however they see fit.
Hmm.
Uh, but again, I think that goes down to what you're just saying there is, but that doesn't mean that we're doing the right thing in the first place.
Yeah, and it speaks to that kind of hands-off attitude. Like those outside prison, kind of like, hey, out of sight, out of mind, you do you. I don't want to know about it. You have your latitude, quote unquote, whatever the hell that means.
I, yeah, latitude. I mean, I get so like we've both been in crisis situations involving mental health, and like, yes, there is a lot of quick decision making that has to happen, but we're like trained for that. And
Yeah.
and you know very well that if you go into crisis work that there is risk involved, and you also know that you can't violate the other person's rights. However, if your safety become like if somebody is trying to attack me, I can protect myself however I need to do that.
There's
Um,
guidelines though that we follow. This
right.
seems like it's just wide open, like we're just
Right.
kicking
And
the
th
door open.
this is a power and authority situation. Like there's a closed door between you. You see someone who's having a severe mental health crisis smashing their head against the wall and you do nothing. That is not harm to you. That is
That
harm to
goes back
them.
to, aren't they supposed to take care of their physical health? That seems like a
Well,
physical health issue.
that is their lateral decision making, I guess.
I think the latitude is too wide,
Too latitudinal.
too
And
latitudinal.
my dad shared back when he did this for 20 years as a guard, not this, but he worked in the system as a guard. And
Yeah.
one of his biggest issues was all of a sudden they were like, we need more funding to support the guards, and that which sounds great, but then they gave them all SWAT gear, which is very dangerous, and trained none of them on how to use it. So then all of a sudden you have all these guards who are all pumped up on I can protect myself now,
Mm,
I can hurt you now, and no training on how to use it appropriately, let alone ethically. So
my
it's
God.
not. It's
So
horrible.
the answer to problems with power and authority is let's increase the power and authority.
Right.
Okay.
So, in summary, we know that there is a relationship between the brain, the social environment, and our world is built around systems, and our systems can control our social environments, having a direct systemic impact to people's mental health. And prison systems are just kind of a microcosm of and being able to show how true that is. And I think brings up multiple points of one, knowing that that even matters in general, and then also a huge human rights issue.
Mhm. Yeah. We can't
And I have no answer.
dehumanize people and then expect them to reintegrate in society. It's a real problem.
What did you ask me? I want to find this. You asked me the rates of
Oh yeah, which states are like increasing, which states
right,
are
right, right, right,
decreasing? Maybe just a couple examples of each.
right. Okay, I'm gonna look that up real quick. Eh.
It's just it's just interesting that this is still on the table, I guess.
I mean, it's not even just on the table.
Like it's still happening. It's just so interesting to me.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but I don't feel like we've nailed it. I don't think we're there. We've arrived.
Okay, here's one stat. There's about 122,840 people in federal and state adult prisons and federal local jails who were placed in restrictive housing or solitary confinement for 22 hours or more on a given day in 2019. So 122,840 people are put in solitary confinement for 22 hours or more on any given day.
Wow,
That's a lot.
that is a lot.
Okay, so let me see here. I got a map of this US share of prisoners in solitary confinement. What state is that? Hold on, there's one state that is a lot.
Oh,
Which one are you? I don't know my states well enough. We learned this from
we're very bad at state recognition.
oh, thank goodness I tapped it and it popped up. Nevada.
Nevada, okay.
Nevada in 2019, they had 12,202 prisoners, and prisoners in solitary confinement, they had 3,140, which was 25.7% of the total population in the prison.
They need to learn some different strategies, Nevada.
We have 16,613 people in prisons in 2019 in Washington and 785 in solitary, which is 4.7% in comparison to that Nevada 25.7%.
Okay, but I'm surprised that we have so many, really. I mean,
Um,
we think of ourselves as sort of a progressive state.
Virginia, yeah, I agree. Virginia has one of the lower ones. They had 29,994 prisoners with 521 in solitary, and that's 1.7%.
Okay.
So there you go.
I'm glad you said the percentage was also low because I was going to say, well, Virginia is like one of those really tiny states, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah,
It's like a little
the
sliver.
percentage matters. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
percentage matters.
There you go.
All right. Well, what can we do? I mean, write our
Um,
legislators.
yeah, I mean that's the thing I think everybody says, but they don't. I think it's kind of like I honestly don't. I dove into this topic and there is no clear avenue other than if something has happened to you, seek
Get a
litigation.
lawyer.
So it goes to court. Yeah, because like the only thing that seems to matter right now are the court cases because those court cases that happen and are based on human rights, if it goes in that favor of the person, then it can actually be used again to support
Because
that
that
next case
precedence
and
is
then
good.
to support the next case, unless there is a larger law made. But in this country, good fucking luck. Like getting a federal
A federal law. Yeah.
guideline. Yeah, like good luck.
I mean, maybe we could make some progress like at our state level. I don't know. More research needed too, though. So research is out there.
Right, right. And I think that's to me, it's like there's enough. There's enough research. Like we know it does things.
It seems like it'd
So
be a slam dunk research project. Get published. Come on, grad students out there.
Washington, how to advocate for because really this has to do with just prisoner rights in general in Washington state. So there is the in Washington
Sorry, my light
www.hrw.org
just fell over.
is the Human Rights Watch prisoner resources. They will they help they give right away the address to write letters and send
Oh,
complaints to.
really?
Yeah, that was actually where'd it go?
That's
AC, yeah,
useful.
the ACLU of Washington, PO Box
Oh, okay.
4115, Seattle, Washington 98194, phone number 206-624-2184.
ACLU.
So the Bill of Rights would only be well-meaning promises if people did not fight to protect it. The ACLU is the nation's premier organization in defending and expanding all civil liberties and rights in America. Our job is to conserve America's original civic values, the Constitution, and the Constitutional Bill of Rights. And so then it has a bunch of different projects and different ways and websites that you can go click on to learn more. So actually, that's great. Maybe
ACLU does some cool shit.
yeah, and that was pretty easy. So I'm going to look into that more. And if you don't live in Washington State, Google is your friend in this context. So
Yeah,
just,
ACLU is nationwide, so you have your own
yeah,
ACLU.
you have your little subcategory.
Look
So
at.
Google it. All right. Powers within our hands. We have to have hope. See, I was starting to feel defeated and I'm like, good luck. But like the
You
little
always
brain,
got to pivot to action. You got to take all
right,
that and do
right,
something.
do
It's the
something
only
about
way,
it.
or else that we'll get that hopelessness and helplessness.
Right. And then people won't do it. And then it becomes bystander effect. You expect everyone else to do it for you. All
Okay,
right.
our
I can't.
last episode. You didn't listen to it. What did I talk about? Oh,
Last episode.
mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Yes. So check it out. We talked about genetically engineered mosquitoes. It's super scary. Please support us financially on our Patreon. It's only $1 and you get all kinds of exclusive videos and other exciting things. And give us a positive review and some stars, 5 stars, positive review. It'd be great.
Mhm. Every little bit matters.
Until next time,
Oh gosh. Until next time.
how about less latitude and more attitude?
How am I supposed to follow that? Um, until next time until next time. Oh gosh, I'm stuck. My brain's all stuck in my topic. Let me have a moment. I need a moment.
You could just do right to your ACLU. That'd be good.
I mean, do that. And until next time, challenge your cisgender heteronormative white male
Cis
asshole.
white males. I mean, there's some good ones out there, I'm sure, but there's the power structure is all askew.
Question them. You can question really anybody. I trust no one, question everything. It's
That's
fine.
right. 100%. Bye.
Bye.
There's the power structure is all askew.
Question them. You can question really anybody. I trust no one, question everything. It's
That's
fine.
right. 100%.